What's going on, everyone? It's been a long time, or a decent amount of time, since I did an interview. I'm in the apartment now, and I just wanted to bring Brian on. Now, let me read this real quick. This is from Erin. I got an email. Hi again, Micah. Thanks for responding to my message. Not only does the Titan sub thing stink high up in the dome, the supposed deaths of these people on board also coincide with the 1 year anniversary of Roe versus Wade being walked back. Can you maybe do a video addressing your thoughts on maritime law in relation to all this? Fuck it. Let's try it. Hey, Brian.
How are we doing, brother?
Good, man. It's good to have you. It looks like it's very sunny where you are for a change. Usually it was like raining or I don't know.
Yep.
So you heard what I just read, right?
Right. Yeah, I think I saw that post also.
Right. So let's first and foremost define maritime law. And to be perfectly honest with you, I'm not sure of anyone besides Jordan Maxwell who's done so much work into maritime law. So if you could just tell everyone what it is and how it rules and how it's used in the courts and things of that nature.
All right. And that's really not really too difficult for me. I worked on the high seas for many, many years. I held a Z card, which is a requirement for you to work on one of the vessels. And, so every day I came on, I had to sign the captain's manifest to come on. And I got to kind of see behind the scenes as far as how admiralty and maritime operate, because it's a totally different set of laws and rules than what we're used to.
Where did it even come from?
Where did it come from? That's kind of an interesting question. Actually, this goes way back, starting in Greece.
Right? The Egyptians.
Beg your pardon?
The Egyptians, maybe?
Even prior to the Egyptians.
Because they were shipbuilders, right? So they had to build a law around it, around rules of commerce and stuff.
Right. Well, as far as the Egyptians, you'd be getting more into like the Phoenicians or the people from Greece, as far as being ocean people or water people. And so the laws that were followed were actually called the Rhodian Sea Laws. And those existed between 900 BC up until 300 BC. And then later on, different jurisdictions started writing their own laws. And eventually, I think in about 1550, it came into England, and England started writing their admiralty laws and maritime laws. Now, one of the things a lot of people don't realize that for an admiralty case to exist, well, and for starters, actually, let me back up just a little bit there, as far as these admiralty cases go, because they're very distinct from what would be known as like common law cases. Which are court decision cases. And these cases are particular to the federal government. In fact, if you go back and look, like for US and Canada, it is the federal government that's controlling the admiralty cases, and it's the High Court in Great Britain that takes care of the admiralty cases.
Would like JAG be a part of that?
JAG is the military courts.
Okay.
Right. Those are your JAG officers. Those are just strictly military. Now, the cases for admiralty, for starters, these are really, you've got admiralty and maritime. Maritime is for cases and things that occur on the high seas, okay, on the open waters. The admiralty are for cases regarding shipping, things that happen in the harbors, fishing, for instance. Those fall under admiralty. Now, for a case to exist, number one, they're going to be confined to the federal courts, and that's due to the 1789 Judiciary Act. That's what gives the federal government basically exclusive jurisdiction over the admiralty cases.
Was that something that Washington did when he be sworn in as the first? Well, I mean, not the first, but the first president, so to speak.
Yeah, I don't think this is something necessarily that he did, but it was something that the judiciary did, that they set up, because, of course, they've got laws for the land, and they call it like the Constitution, the law of the land, for instance, right? Well, included in the Constitution is the mention of maritime or admiralty. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of people want to jump and try and say that all these cases that we see in court, they're all admiralty or maritime, which isn't really the case. For one, for a for an admiralty case to exist, the jurisdiction must be invoked. All right. There has to be something going on verbally that is demanding the admiralty jurisdiction over the case. And like I said, this would be in a federal situation. It'd be a federal court. If you go to the Constitution, the statement in the Constitution, which is within Article 3, all right, which tells you this is an Article 3 court, not an Article 1 court. In Article 3, it says admiralty law extends to any navigable waters within the U.S. And of course, we know there's a lot of navigable waters within the U.S. There's almost 270,000 square miles inland, which makes up 7% of the U.S. And then aside from that, then you're going to get into also what's going on, like you're mentioning the sub, the Titan. You're going to get into things that are happening within, say, federal waters that surround the U.S. Gulf of Mexico is a little different. You've got to go out because there are no international waters in the Gulf. You have to go out 7.8 nautical miles to get to federal jurisdiction. But on the main coast around the U.S., it's like 2.8 nautical miles to get to international waters. Now, this case with the Titan, definitely.
Just for people who don't know, what's the translation from a nautical to an actual mile?
All right, like I said, for the Gulf of Mexico, you're looking at 7.8 nautical miles.
Oh no! I meant what is nautical? I meant what is a nautical mile? Right.
That's what I'm saying.
Oh, okay.
So when I say 7.8 nautical, what that translates into would be like 9 miles.
Okay.
And on the other shorelines around the U.S., you're looking at about 3 miles to get into international waters, which is definitely where this Titan would have been in international waters.
Now, real quick, a lot of people are talking about that book that came out 14 years before the Titanic came down. It was The Wreck of the Titan. I don't know if you've heard of that book. A lot of people are equating that to this thing right now. I just wanted to throw that out there for people who are listening. There was a book that came out 14 years before Titanic. It was in like 1898, I think. It was called The Wreck of the Titan. A lot of people say it was the Titanic. Some people say it was the Titan right now. History repeats itself or whatever. But I'm sorry. I'll let you continue.
Well, yeah, no, it's interesting how, when mankind tempts fate, fate always responds, and it's not always necessarily a good response that you get.
Right.
The Titanic, this statement was made that it was the unsinkable ship. You know what I mean? And so I guess God, whoever that God might be, probably kind of laughed. Like the saying goes, "Man plans and God laughs." Right.
Right.
And so it was almost like a temptation against, the God, whether it's a God of the sea or whatever, that the Titanic is an unsinkable ship. And, the same statement was actually made also about the Twin Towers. Those were, called indestructible, although the gentleman, I can't remember his name, is an Asian gentleman that was the architect for the Twin Towers. Every building I think that guy designed failed in some way or another. Yeah, that's a pretty interesting story itself.
Wow.
So, and like I say, to me, one of the things that's interesting and kind of goes hand in hand with a lot of what you talk about as well, is we see like on license plates here on Florida, it says, "In God we trust," or you see that on the money. And as we know, God is just a generic term. It's like saying manager or boss. You know what I mean? It's not a name, it's a title. And so, they tell us that in God we trust, but they don't tell us which God it is that they trust in, For the sea, the Roman god would be Neptune, or with the
I couldn't
Greek, it'd be
remember if it was Jupiter.
Poseidon.
I couldn't remember if it was Jupiter or Neptune, but yeah, the name was Poseidon too. They
Yeah,
have
up
a
in
statue
Poseidon.
in Las Palmas in the Gran Canary Islands. They have a statue of Neptune holding. I think it's a trident. It might be.
Yep,
Like
that's right.
in the water. Yeah. Um, I talk about this in a video that I made too. When I talk about the Elohim, when you read in Hebrew, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz, it's the first line of the Bible. In the beginning, God created heavens and the earth. It's not read that way. Elohim, El is God, and Ohim is like an apostrophe S in Hebrew. So it's the gods. So there are no
Gods.
gods. Yeah.
Yeah, Elohim, it's plural for gods, and there's numerous verses. I went a few weeks ago and just did kind of a cursory check through scripture where there's a mention of multiple gods, and it's actually the God of the Old Testament that refers to it quite a bit. And just doing a cursory check, I found 15, 20 verses referring to multiple gods.
Mm-hmm.
So, churchianity's view that there is only one God,
Which goes back to
is
Abraham, which is
very
bullshit to begin
false.
with, because we've literally, you want to talk about archaeology being like evidence? They found fertility gods in Israel from the time of the Old Testament. The Jews didn't create monotheism. In fact, they didn't practice it. But if you go even further back, monotheism in 1367 BC, if you want to get literal, it wasn't the Jews, it wasn't Abraham that created monotheism, it was Akhenaten. He told everyone to worship the sun. It was a one God thing, and that's what they don't want people to know. So yeah, the gods of this, yeah.
And I may go back even further. I mean, there are fertility gods are probably the most prominent god that you'll see, but there's fertility gods that they found that they claim to be as much as 25 to 30,000 years old, which is definitely even preceding Akhenaten.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
But I think, as far as, back to the idea, to digress on the God of the U.S., to me, I find that to be kind of an interesting study, because if you look over the centuries at when, rise and fall of different nations, is that whenever they take over, whenever a new government comes in or establishing power comes in, they go and they're going to put up statues or paintings or architecture depicting their god.
Don't they
And
usually
so,
say that? Don't they usually say that an empire runs like 250 to 300 years?
right,
Isn't
an
that
average of 250.
right? And we're literally at that mark.
Yeah, but we're definitely at that mark, but we also have to consider there's other nations that existed when the U.S. was recognized in 1783.
Mm-hmm.
There was France that existed. There was England that existed. So there's a few that are still older than us. Maybe
Well,
the
I guess
U.S.
we
is,
can amend it. We could say the empire, right? Can we say the
yeah,
empire is about 250 years? The country's
right.
been there forever, but the empire.
Well, the empire itself as a whole, I would say the empire would be Rome. When you really look at it, I mean, I said for a long time that the United States was nothing other than the Roman Empire, just repackaged and moved somewhere else. And I thought it was funny. One time I was traveling down the road and I was listening to a speech being given by Mike Pompeo and Benjamin Netanyahu. And he came right out and said, the United States is the new Rome.
It is the new
And I was
Rome.
like, there we go. I got it right out of the horse's mouth.
In Rome, when Caesar used to go to the mound, when he used to go, there were the 7 hills, remember? And the one that he used to rule from was called Capitoline Hill, whereas we now have Capitol Hill. The obelisks, the architecture is all the same. The Roman Empire never died. Think about this, Brian. When you're in school, right? I mean, you're a little older than me, but like when you're in school and you're typing up papers, right? What is the default setting you have to type in? It's Times New Roman or the New Roman Times. They embed this stuff so that everybody knows, or nobody knows, I should say, but everybody who's in charge knows. And basically, the Roman Empire runs out of 3 places right now. Washington, D.C., that's the military. You have the City of London, that's finance. And you have Rome, which is spiritual. That's basically what they did. Or the Vatican, I should say. Vatican
Right.
City. And yeah, that's basically what it is. But I want to bring this back to maritime law, though, right now. How does it supersede the other forms of law? Does that question even make sense? Because I've heard rumors that a judge can change the court from common law to religious law and maritime law. Is that true?
Yeah, changing it from common law to ecclesiastical law. Yeah, I've heard that stated, and I've even personally, in my own case, witnessed a judge get up, leave the bench, go back into the judge's chambers, or the Holy of Holies, as I call it, and come back out. Whether there was a change made or not there, I don't know. And whether they do or not, I'm not really sure. One of the things I look at is what's useful. You know what I mean? There's a lot of things that are talked about out there, but I like to look at, okay, what is actionable information? What is something I can use that I can actually do something with? You know what I mean? And now, as far as superseding, the admiralty or maritime law, it's just a separate body of law.
Okay.
Is all it is. It's the same as the separate body of courts. You've got your Article 1 courts, okay, which are going to be more of your administrative courts. They're going to be like your tax courts, court of appeals, military, that type of thing. And then you're going to have your Article 3 courts, and then you're looking at your Supreme Court, district courts, civil and criminal courts, and admiralty and maritime will fall there under Article 3 as well. So it's just a different body. And they focus on separate things specifically. So for something to be admiralty or maritime necessarily, it has to have specific elements to it.
Okay, so let me ask you this question. Insurance, and we've talked behind the scenes a while ago about insurance and the importance or the non-importance of it, but I'm under the impression that insurance, I think I made a video about this, insurance was created, the original use for insurance was to protect ships from piracy. So you'd pay a little bit of money, and if you got ransacked, you'd be able to claim your wages or whatever it was. I was just wondering your thoughts on that.
I think that's probably one of the most common places we would have seen insurance first start up at. I think it might have even started up, whether it was prior or later on, with so-called Christians that were escorted by the Jesuits or Knights Templars, rather, through the Holy Lands, because they were carrying large amounts of valuable, whether it's gold or money or just product, high value product. And so I think those products at the same time were also insured. And I think that is one of the ways that the Knights Templars made a whole lot of their money, because they became extremely wealthy. And I think that was one of the avenues they did it from, was through insurance policies for those people.
Yeah, and that's basically what got them destroyed by the Vatican in 1307, right? That's where Friday the 13th comes from. It was October 13th, Friday the 13th.
That's one of the claims, yeah. And inappropriately for tonight, I hope everybody likes my Resident Evil hat. But I think they give us so many things, like in the movies and stuff like that.
They do.
And that movie, that symbol was for Serco, which was a service company, just like the Jesuits were. And their colors, if people remember the War of the Roses, the white and the red rose, I think that's where the colors came from for the Resident Evil symbol. And
the Umbrella Corporation, right?
Umbrella Corporation, exactly, which is nothing more than a representation of Serco, which really does exist worldwide today. And at the same time, the East India Company, we got to give kudos to them. We wouldn't be where we are without them.
Right, that's the whole Christopher Columbus, right? He's sailing to find spices in India. He went to India. That's why when he came here, he called them all Indians, and we still do that because we don't know any better.
He didn't know where. Yeah, he didn't know where he was.
My ass, he didn't know where he was. So, what would be an example of something that would be tried in maritime law? Like, what could happen in the seas? Are we talking about like warships? Are we talking about like war crimes, things of that nature?
I think that right there might be kind of murky waters, pardon the pun, as to whether or not that would be tried and as like a war crime, or if that would also at the same time fall under admiralty. And admiralty very well may have a section of law dealing with war crimes on the high seas. That would just make sense that they do. I think probably one of the best examples modern day that people look at, which you can go online, go to Google Scholar, and you can find all sorts of things that have been tried regarding admiralty or maritime laws. But I think probably one of the most popular things for people, maybe of you and I's genre, would be the death of Kirsty MacColl. Kirsty MacColl sang that song, "They Don't Know." I don't know if you remember or not. You'd know it if you heard it. But they don't know about us. They don't know about love. That was her song. And she died off from Cozumel, Mexico, in the Gulf of Mexico there. And she was diving. And this is one of the things I tell people, especially when you look at thinking that everything might be maritime or admiralty law, you need to go and look at cases. Look at situations that have occurred and tried under admiralty and maritime, and look and see what kind of comparisons there are. Because there's a couple big distinctions with a admiralty case. Like I said, number one, it's going to be tried in a federal court. And also number two is that they never have a jury. It's only tried by a tribunal. It's never tried by a jury. So you're not going to see juries in a maritime case. Now, with the case of Kirsty MacColl, when she died, I believe it was December of the year 2000, when she was doing her diving with her sons, and she was hit by a boat owned by a gentleman that was the third largest owner of, say, like big box store or something like that in Mexico. A very wealthy guy. And the claim was, and eyewitnesses disputed it, but the claim was that it was actually one of his deckhands that was captaining the boat. And so it was that deckhand, his name was Jose Sanyam, if that's how it's pronounced. But he was the one that was actually tried in court for her death. And that conviction, now you stop and think nowadays, if there was like a case like this that existed, a murder or something like that.
I'm thinking of that case of the woman that drowned. Was it Natalie Wood?
Right.
Similar thing or no?
Right. But a lot of cases, especially like a murder case or something like that, as long as they aren't too confusing or too convoluted, they'll get settled in a reasonable amount of time. Now, that's one of the things with maritime law. In fact, the administrative law and common law of the United States did borrow things from maritime law, such as quick and speedy trial. That came from maritime law, because back in the day, you didn't know how long that ship was going to be at port. Come high tide, that guy's going to be back on the ship and he's gone again. So it needed to be a quick and speedy trial. So that's where we got that from. And that's probably also where we got the concept of bail from, to get bailed out.
It goes back to bail.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Whether it's bail, like to bail out a ship, or whether it's to the god Baal. I choose to maybe go with the latter on that.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is that Jordan Maxwell talked about this quite a bit. He talks about how maritime law is the oldest law, and he talks about money, currency, like the ocean currents. He talks about play on words, like the birth. When a woman gives birth, that's what a ship does when it comes into port. It gives birth. And then what happens when you give birth? The guy presents a certificate of manifest, or a birth certificate. It's a play on the whole thing, right?
Yep. Exactly. And I think because since it is such an old law, I think so many things were borrowed, from it, because those were terms that were commonly known within the judicial society. And so that's why those things were used. But I wanted to mention, though, regarding that death of Kirsty MacColl, the interesting thing, it took 3 years for that case to end up being decided
Now,
And
when you're talking about maritime, because that has to do with the sea, where is the jurisdiction? Where does this case take place? And if people are found guilty, where do they serve their time?
all right, that's going to fall. There is, I believe it's called the IMP, which is established by the United Nations, and that handles international maritime actions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So as far as where they serve time, I'm really not up to where people that are convicted of things serve international crime time at. Who knows? It would, I would guess, maybe be somewhere in more of like a neutral position. Where she was at, being Gulf of Mexico, I'm not sure that they were necessarily 9 miles out, which would have put them into the federal jurisdiction. Right. I believe this was all tried by the Mexican courts. So the jurisdiction of this admiralty case would have been tried by the country of whose waters it existed in. That's one of the base points in admiralty law. Well, anyway, upon the conviction, because you can only imagine if you're convicted of something as horrific as that, what would happen to you in court. I mean, people end up spending, 15, 20 years life, whatever the case is, for murder, depending on where you're tried at. Well,
can I ask you a quick question? I need you to clear something up real quick, and I'm going to let you finish this point. Life, I heard this, and it could be wrong, but life is not your whole life. I heard life is a 25-year term. Is that true or not?
Yes, it depends on the jurisdiction where this occurs at, what state it occurs at. I remember watching one time a court case of people outside of, I think it might have been like a YouTube Live or something like that, or a Facebook Live. Anyway, people were out front of a courtroom because this guy was being tried for, I believe it was like the death of their daughter. And when the announcement of the jury's decision came out, the jury gave him 35 years in prison. And the family freaked out. They're like, no, he should have been given life. Oh, this is wrong. He deserved a life sentence. And I just kind of laughed to myself, kind of the ignorance of people is because I believe the state it occurred at, it was a 25-year sentence would have been life. But they chose not to go with life. They chose to give him 35 years. You know what I mean? So he got harsher than what a life sentence would have been. And a lot of people don't comprehend these things. And it's really because we're not taught this stuff in school. You're not taught any of the legal aspects or how the judicial system, the inner workings of it really work when we go to school. That this is all kind of left out for us to kind of figure out for ourselves, which because of that, they make a lot of money off from it. Because people come in not knowing what steps you take first or what you do next or how to respond to a complaint, for instance. Is it a qualified complaint? How do you respond to a qualified complaint? A lot of these things aren't known. So the courts actually make a lot of money from the missteps of the common man just because they're not educated on it. That's why I recommend people to go out and take a paralegal course. Doesn't matter if you pass it or not. Or you're not trying to get, a license or, any kind of degree or anything, but you're just going to learn the steps of how things occur within a court setting.
Right.
Because we're not taught that.
Finish your thought on that lady.
Yeah, Jose Senyam, when he was convicted, like I said, you stop and think about, the kind of sentence that would carry. Well, guess what his sentence was?
What?
His sentence was 34 months. Okay. Year and a half. Is that right? A year and a half? 12, almost 24, 2.5. Yeah. Almost 2.5, 3 years. Almost 3. So under 3 years was his sentence. But that was rescinded for just a fine of 61 pounds.
Was it appealed? Can you even appeal in maritime?
Sure you can. Yeah, they have appeals courts.
Okay.
That's one of the main things about maritime is they
remand you until appeal, right?
Right. No, not necessarily remanded. It means kind of it'll be handed down to the previous court. If you try and appeal something and they remand it, they're sending it back to the original court. All right. probably with instructions or whatever. But that's what happened to him. Is his sentence was basically remanded or set down or set aside for just a 61-pound fine, which at that time would have equated to like $90 US.
Wow. Wait,
So
they use the pound in Mexico?
That was what was being done. It was probably English.
Because it's international, right?
Yeah, it was probably what would have been in English courts, international English courts, which that would make sense for them to put it in pound. But, or at least the article I read was maybe written for England because that's where her family was from. So they listed it in pounds. But either way, it was under $100 ended up being his fine for her death. And what had occurred also was that when you are diving, they have specific dive flags. I think people have seen them with their white flags with like red stripes. People have seen those probably before, didn't know what they are, but those are dive flags that are put out to let other boaters know that someone is diving and to stay away from those waters, or at least be very slow, go very slow through them. And he wasn't going slow at all. It was, by eyewitness accounts, doing 18 to 20 knots, which would mean over 20 miles an hour that he was going.
You know what I can't help but think with all this talk that you've been brilliantly sharing now? I can't help but think what would have happened if we actually gave a shit as a society and the courts actually worked for the people. And Epstein Island with the submarines that shuttled and trafficked minors back and forth. I'm wondering if that would have been a maritime case.
That possibly could have been a maritime case if something had happened on high seas or on the waters. But them going back and forth would have made it, international or interstate, depending on the status of that island. Would have made it like an interstate case because it happened between one state and another, which it does up the ante. Things that are interstate bring in the feds. That becomes a federal case. And that's when like FBI can step in, is when something is happening between states. But, I think that's one of the biggest tricks that have been played on people. You mentioned, if the system was really working for the people, well, guess what? It does work for the people. But what's happened is that the American populace has been deceived as to who the people are. You would think it's you and me. Well, guess what? No, it's not you and me. They could give two craps about you and me. I think it's interesting if you are someone who listens to the news, you can even hear it on radio broadcasts. Once you hear it, it starts popping out to you more and more, is you'll hear them talk about the public, and then you also hear them mention the general public. Well, the public is the people. Those are your elected officials, the people running the agencies, the people working within government. Those are we the people. That is the public. The general public is just Joe Sixpack on the street, you and I.
It's always a play on words. I'm telling you, etymology is the root of everything. Things have original meanings, and I talk about this a lot. My first video I ever did on this channel was a video where I showed you guys all the Illuminati hand symbols. This, all that stuff. I went over all of that. And these have original meanings. And if you understand them, the powers in the original meaning, see what happens is they slightly twist things and pervert it. And when they twist it and pervert it, they attach a new meaning to it, and then they keep people playing these games where they're spotting it. Etymology is the root of a lot of this. And people like Jordan Maxwell and Santos Bonocci, who are my two teachers and contemporaries and friends, or Jordan was until he passed, taught etymology well. I don't do etymology that often, but I do get into it a little bit. But there's roots of all this. In fact, one of the things that Jordan taught me was that when you go to law school, they don't teach you the law. You don't go over the law. They teach you procedure. And then when you get to court the first time, most of these lawyers don't even know how to file a freaking anything. And they have to have more experienced lawyers teach them what to do when they go to court.
Or that's what their paralegals do for them, because the paralegals learn the details of the process.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And, I think it was Confucius that said signs and symbols rule the world.
They do.
And, with the things you've shown and Jordan Maxwell has shown, that's extremely true. And there's so many of these signs and symbols are right in front of us. And some of them are even kind of, maybe pardon the pun, sleight of hand, because if you watch like presidents sign executive orders, pay attention. Are they using their right hand to do it, or are they using their left hand to do it?
There's a saying, right? Don't they like to tell you that 4 or 5 of the last 7 or 8 presidents were lefties? Don't they like telling you that over and over again?
Yeah, I think the majority of them actually have been left-handed, which is very interesting.
Which goes back the left hand and the right hand, guys. Brian, this is from your time. If you were a lefty going through a religious school growing up, they tied your left hand behind your back, and you had to learn how to write with your right hand, because the left-handed path is the devil. I'm a lefty. Yeah, the devil's path. You have to learn how to do it with the right.
Yeah, they probably would have. And myself, I never went to a public school. I went to a so-called, air quotes, Christian school all my life. And they didn't go to that extreme there. But yeah, that's absolutely true. And this goes back to Mithras, actually. A lot of these things like the oath and the raising of the right hand, that goes back to Mithras, which was
he was a competing god at the time of Christ. Christ being the Piscean solar deity in Christianity. Mithra, the Pope's hat is called a mitre, because if you take the hat off and you turn it to the side, it looks like a fish head. It's mitre. It's mitre, and it's Mithra and Dagon worship. These are the fish gods of the age of Pisces, the 2 fish.
Yep, and Mithra was the god of the Roman soldiers during that era as well. And and there's many other ones similar to Mithra that even precede Mithra. But and all of these religions, they all have very common threads that run through them, as far as what is taught and what they follow, and they always have 3 things in common. They're always water, blood, and oil.
Yep.
Those things are always in common with every one of them, and going back to the main elements, the essential elements. So these people were all, what would they call the scientists of that time? That was just like today. That was their religion, was their science.
Right. Absolutely. Just absolutely insane. Have you seen any recent maritime law cases that have caught your attention? And to tie it into Aaron's question at the beginning, I don't even know if there's a case there. Right. I mean, the Titan went down. It blew up. It wasn't. It didn't do anything. Right. There's no case there. There's nothing to be made there. The maritime law doesn't apply to that. Right.
Well, I've discussed this with some other maybe legal professional people, whatever, and looking. You first look at that they would have been signing agreements as far as the passengers go. Which meant, I agree to die. The worst case scenario.
My first thought when I heard they were doing this, and when I heard that there were a bunch of these highly qualified engineers that were turned away because they wanted a more diverse crowd to work on the thing. Holy cow. My first thought is the insurance payout is going to be absurd, but not if they signed an agreement, right?
Well, this is the only possibility really that I see, and I very well could be wrong, no doubt about it. But the one possibility that I see is an action. Now, when we're talking about admiralty, maritime, that kind of stuff, you're looking at what's called flags of convenience. There was boats that I worked on that flew a flag of convenience. They flew the Panama flag, which puts you under different tax codes, stuff like that. Yeah. While the Titan, which was that sub, that ship flew under a Canadian flag. So, a possibility could be that Canada could come after the company as far as their expenses for the search and that kind of thing, and any possible negligence that they
find it interesting too that the wreckage that they found. You're talking 15,000 feet below. You're talking an implosion. You're talking the pressure, the implosion. They found wreckage. off Canada, right? They just released that.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know if anybody's ever seen a container that size implode, but when it implodes, it's like that, bang, snap of a finger.
It's like when you vacuum seal something, but it's
Yeah,
probably it's infinitely faster. There is no way they even had a moment to blink when that thing. No way. They were just gone. They were just gone.
No, they immediately got to intimately know each other.
Yeah.
So, which is a good thing.
That's in physics. You talk about the Big Bang, and you talk about the Great Crunch. That would have been a great crunch.
Yeah, for them definitely. Which to me, that is a good thing. I'm not happy anybody died. I'm not happy whenever anybody passes away. But fortunately, it was a situation like that, rather than sitting down there underwater in a closed space, wondering how much time you have left in oxygen.
Right.
You know what I mean? Or looking at each other, going, you know what? If I knock that guy off, I might be able to breathe for a couple hours longer.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, fortunately, it was quick and painless. And now, something I will add to this that I haven't heard brought up. Now, granted, all the things we see with like LGBTQYXYZ, whatever, and June being a gay pride month, celebrated as gay pride month, is that every June, we're there. We're at the end of the month. Every June towards the end of the month, you see something occur that relates with this somehow. And I'm kind of surprised I haven't seen anything correspond with this, because this definitely would have been a sacrifice, if nothing else.
You're talking about, can you describe the sacrifice? Because I've definitely touched on a bunch of the sacrifice. I want you to flesh out this idea.
Well, I'm still kind of looking at it, because if it had been related, I would have thought that one of those groups would have jumped out, saying that there was some correlation between that movement and maybe the company. Maybe it's there and it just hasn't been pointed out yet. I don't know. But I've had my eye open. I always keep my eye open the past several years to the month of June, especially towards the last week of June, and look at events that occur, such as maybe the White House being lit up, or Bill Clinton signing a particular act, like the Marriage Act. Things like that always seem to happen. Something major happens towards the end of June. And so I've kind of been watching, and when this occurred, I was like, I wonder if this is going to tie in somehow. So that I haven't seen a correlation made.
I believe that the Titan happened right around the summer solstice. It was like within a day or days. So there's we know that the elites like to create false flags and sacrifice things around astrology. I've
exactly
on this. Did you know that in 9/11, during that, I'm from New York, right? 40 minutes away. I was in college. My friend picked me up. We went to his house. You could see the smoke from the buildings. During 9/11, a couple weeks after that, they came out with a article where they were talking about how one dog died. They had all these firemen that died, they had these police officers that died, but they mentioned one dog, and it was in a bunch of papers. Could you guess what the dog's name was?
Oh, I can only imagine.
Sirius.
Are you serious? Yeah, that doesn't surprise me not at all.
I'm trying to bring out all this stuff that happens around astrology. Like I've gotten very big into detail about how we always have a stock market crash with a Republican, and it's always in Libra, because Libra is the scales, it's the judge. They're judging us. They understand astrotheology, they do, and the fact that this Titan happened right around the summer solstice just really interests me.
Well, and you look at when the U.S. went into the Middle East, and you got George Bush up there talking about, shock and awe, Well, shock and awe, the way he was saying it sounded to me more like the goddess shock.
Here's what I can't put together, Brian. Brian, here's what I can't put together. I recently made a 9/11 video where I said that the reason 9/11 happened, and I'm not even talking about the missile that hit the Pentagon because it was a missile. I'm not talking about the missile that hit the Pentagon. I'm not talking about Tower 7 that fell. I'm not talking about those indestructible towers. I'm not talking about there was no plane in Pennsylvania. I'm not talking about any of that. What I'm talking about with 9/11 was oh shit, where was I going with this? It brought us into Afghanistan. Why Afghanistan? Because the Taliban was destroying the poppy fields and it was causing chaos in world markets. I had someone in my comment section when I made this video say, I had a friend whose son, or it was his son, or her son, I can't remember, would phone from Afghanistan and they'd be like, what are you doing? Nothing much, just guarding the poppy fields. So my question is this. Biden ripped everyone out of Afghanistan. Now the Taliban's back in and they're doing it again. They're destroying all the poppy fields. Why would Biden, obviously it wasn't his decision, but why would they pull everyone out if they were doing such a job? Because 90% of the opium and the poppies come from Afghanistan, of the world.
Right.
So why would they pull people? That seems like a financial disadvantage to the CIA.
Well, and look at the numbers. Myself, I like looking at graphs. I like looking at, show me the numbers, and you look at percentages of whether you want to say deaths, suicides, overdoses, whatever, that occurred around opioids or heroin, and watch the spike that occurred at that time. You know what I mean? And myself, because of a car,
everything I talk about this, Brian. Everything that they do is for population reduction. Everything. They think there's too many of us. They can't control us. They want the number to be 500 million, as the Gospel of Emmanuel said, and they want the number to be 500 million. And everything that they do, abortion, everything that they do is about population decrease. The stuff in the foods, the roundup on the chemicals, the suicidal seeds, everything guides towards this.
And I recommend trying not be too tunnel visioned on a lot of these things, because whenever something occurs, say like 9/11, it's never to create one outcome. They normally have 3, 4, 5 different things that this is going to touch and this is going to affect.
Well, there was
otherwise they wouldn't spend their time on it.
There was also $1 trillion, as Karen Hughes pointed out before she died. She was an IMF banker. She was really high up too when she became a whistleblower. She pointed out that there was $1 trillion lithium vein that they found in Afghanistan. Right? Those are the reasons they're there. I'm sure it goes deeper than that. But it just confuses me. Like, why would they pull them now? Unless I can't think of a logical reason. I understand why we were protecting it, because financial incentives. You talk about Oxycontin. You talk about all this shit, opium. Why would they pull? That would seem to be so against their motives.
Okay, well, what happened when the U.S. troops were pulled out of there? When they were pulled out of there, one, that means there's going to be a lack of protection over certain things, and at the same time, we also left them a buttload of equipment, didn't we?
Leave them billions of dollars
worth of equipment. So what occurred? What did we do? What did the U.S. do, rather? I don't like using the word we, but what did the U.S. do? The U.S. armed and set up people for another problem that they can come back to later on again. They created a problem.
Did you ever see the movie Lions for Lambs?
No, I haven't.
There was a clip that was going around where Tom Cruise was talking to Meryl Streep, and he talked about it. This happened years before. This happened a while back. It didn't really do that well in the theaters, but it was supposedly a good movie. I don't care for Tom Cruise as a person or Scientology, but I think he's got a screen presence. And he did this huge speech about what happens if they pull out of Afghanistan. Now suddenly you got the Russians in Afghanistan, and we were arming the Taliban at the time. You got Zigbanu Brzezinski right over there telling them this is your holy war, giving him weapons. Osama bin Laden giving him Tim Osman, the CIA asset, Osama bin Laden, giving him all this, and then that didn't work. Or the Russian thing didn't work out. So now he was talking about in the movie how we're 0-2 against the Taliban. Or are we really? Or is there something else going on?
Yeah, well, 0 against them or 0-2 against ourselves. You know what I mean? You remember seeing a meeting, gosh, it was like 10 years ago, um, with a congressman who has since passed away. And he was having a big roundtable meeting, and they were talking about the fighters over there. They were referring to them as his boys. So it's like, wow, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
His boys, John McCain's boys. And, it's interesting here. Oh, probably about 6 months ago, there was a YouTube channel that was playing old video clips from news channels from 20, 30 years ago. And they had a clip with John McCain on there talking to him early in his air quote service to the U.S., within the. And, they're saying, gosh, you just came out of a horrific event. You were held prisoner, POW, what, what got you
Wait,
so excited to join?
Was John McCain part of the whole Jane Fonda and the note, the letter? Was that John McCain?
Well, I don't recall that aspect of it, no.
Because I do.
But
There was one story I did like about McCain that I thought was really funny. They asked him who he takes orders from. They were torturing him, and supposedly, what he did was he gave them the offensive line of the Green Bay Packers.
Perfect. Well, but I thought it was interesting when they asked him, what it was that interested him in joining the U.S. government, running for office. And out of all the statements somebody could make, the statement he made was that he got really excited when he saw what could be done as a congressman. No mention of, I felt like I needed to serve my country, or I wanted to run for office in my country to help country since I'd been a W. And no kind of language like that. It was just simply, when he saw what could be done. It's like, what did he see that could be done? He saw the millions that could be made. That's what he saw.
Isn't it incredible how he went from this like everybody was giving him the benefit of the doubt and people loved him on the Democratic side when he was running for president, and then to how he's just remembered as just this vile warmonger now. Like, look, talk about a fall from grace.
Well, I think if I was known of him, he might be known for a whole lot more worse things than so. But any that's going to stand hand in hand in the halls of Congress and agree to mass elimination of people worldwide, I have a little bit of a problem with. Especially, to me, that goes directly against the law of nations, which is in the Constitution, which means it is part of the U.S. law. And that's the only place where I really saw any teeth in the Constitution as far as, penalties that could be handed down for transgressing against something. And it was for any action against the law of nations. And to me, day by day, you see the U.S. Progressing the law of nations, which essentially says that the whole idea within the law of nations is you don't go against another country unless they've actually come in and are causing harm to your country. And I've yet to see any other country cause harm to us.
You know what the interesting thing too is right now? You could talk about arming Saddam Hussein against Iran. You can talk about bin Laden. Brings a lot of thought to Zelensky, right? We're throwing him all this money right now, but history shows that give it 15, 20 years, we're going to need to take him out, right? Doesn't that seem to be the pattern?
Yeah, that's absolutely the pattern. Exactly. I mean, what happened with Hussein? Well, we knew he had weapons of mass destruction. Well, how did we know? We gave them to him. Well, we know Zelensky's got all this stuff. Well, how do we know? We gave it to him.
Right? It's incredible. It's incredible. It's like, I can't believe Zelensky doesn't study his own history, but I couldn't expect anything more from him. I just saw a video of him like hugging Greta Thunberg, and I almost threw up in my mouth. Like that's what we're up to right now. That's what makes the news.
Well, and that's the thing, after a while, it's so easy to see how U.S. Inc. will set itself up for future actions, as future international actions go. And to me, that just get back to what you said about them pulling out of the Middle East. All they did is they set up a scenario for another future international action, and
Absolutely.
it's going to keep the money rolling in for BlackRock and these organizations that are making bundles off it. And one of the things you don't hear too many people talk about, and I kind of hate to say this, but the U.S. right now, the way everything has been set up the past few years, was in the perfect position to have a total economic collapse.
Mm-hmm.
But what has prevented that? It's been money made up from war. And this is a warring nation. This is how this makes their money,
But at the
and this
same
is what's
time,
kept them afloat.
we're doing so many things at the same time to weaken our military, right? We're lowering standards. They want women in, transgender, this and that. I don't care about LGBT. I mean, like, look, my thought on this, and I've been very clear on my channel, is I don't care about your sexuality or your gender. One, it's not a personality. Stop making it completely about that. And number two, the other thing that, like the organ on the body that pees, I don't care which you prefer to lick on. I don't care. That's the way I tell people. But the truth of the matter is that we're making things weaker. And when I talk about the LGBT like that, I tell people it's a distraction. It's keeping you from your divinity, your dominion, your sovereignty. It's keeping you busy. There's so many distractions out there, and that's the biggest one right now. But it's interesting too.
Well, Micah, along with that, I want to say that the people today are living in the most interesting time ever, because if you look at what can be thrown at the American people, and actually into people all over the world, everybody's handling it a little bit different. But you look at what's being thrown at people today, you've got the gender situation, pronoun situation, say Ukraine wars. You can go on and on. They are hitting every possible point to trigger people, and more so than has ever been in history. And
why?
for the people to be responding the way they are and to be keeping their heads a little bit at least is somewhat commendable, I would say.
Absolutely. There's very few of us, and we got to stick together. So, Bryan, I want to thank you for coming on. Please tell everyone where they can find you and your information, and also tell people what you talk about on a regular basis and where to find you.
Oh, what I talk about on a regular basis. Okay, I'll start with the latter first. Lately, I've been doing a series called Putting Churchianity, because just about everything you're taught is not even following the Bible you're supposed to be following. But I've covered a lot of like law type, I would say, related information, and it's interesting how much that lines up with different religions or different spirituality. It all goes hand in hand. And I have Tactical Sovereignty and Origins of Eternity on Facebook, also on WordPress, and also here at YouTube.
Bryan, thank you very much. I will have you back on soon as we have another topic. Aaron, shout out to Aaron. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope this answered some stuff. The rest of you guys, I hope you guys watch this and enjoy. I haven't done videos in a while, or long videos. I haven't done interviews in a while. Remember, this isn't a podcast. I'm just trying to get you guys information. So thank you, everyone, for watching, and I will talk to you soon.
Thank you, everybody. Be blessed.